Well, hi there, everybody. It's one of those evenings with a little horsingitis, you get a little dried out up here in the mountains. Or if you don't know, you get a little dried out up here in the mountains. How's that sound? So this is the UFO report with me, what's his name, Michael Horn. This is show 3, our third show on our new station, and we are very grateful to Don and BBS for this opportunity. So we're going to talk tonight. As I said, we don't focus as much on UFOs as the title and the background here might indicate. So just we'll leave that up for the UFO segment here. There is a UFO segment here: horsingitis and brainingitis all at once. So tonight we've got a bit of territory to cover. We'll see how much of it we can do this week. Where ufology got stuck. And this is something that I think is actually very important in terms of understanding what's obviously worked, what hasn't worked, what may have worked that we don't see working yet. So in terms of ufology, step 1, if you will, is the eye candy, the craft themselves, the UFOs, the lights in the sky, if you will, the phenomenon of presumably extraterrestrial craft, indicating thereby the existence of actual extraterrestrial life forms who found us to be so important that they came from whatever great distance to our world to appear in our skies. I wonder why. So tons of people get stuck here with the eye candy. They get lost in the phenomena. And they're also very often just seeking entertainment, distraction, significance, even imagining themselves to be contactees, abductees, researchers and investigators and experts, all with no real credentials, no background that would give, let's say, some precedence for they're funneling themselves into this. It's an attractive topic, but they bring no evidence and no particular skills for the most part. I've yet to hear from any, certainly in social media, the people that I hear from that do have apparently enough qualifications by virtue of their thinking and what have you, are the people that seem to show up visiting the Figu and Billy Meier related sites and channels like ours. The contactee abductee thing is especially interesting because, leaving the absence of evidence aside, there's this unwarranted self-importance. Lots of people with channels and sites and all, and it's all kind of regurgitating whatever they have found, oftentimes from so-called experts and government whistleblowers and authorities over the years, and it's basically rehashed. They have nothing new from their own investigation. Now, this could be seen as a big generalization, and since we're going to be doing interviews in the show starting tonight, I'm glad to say I am open to any of these people in these communities. That includes the UFO community, remote viewers. It doesn't go much past that, I'm afraid. Scientists, people who think that they have evidence and that they want to bring it to the discussion, and with real evidence, not to be, chided and ridiculed about it. So that is something we're open to. We actually got a nice lineup of people who have responded to the invitations. All right. That'll be revealing itself in the weeks to come. So after this step 1, the eye candy UFOs, lights in the sky phenomenon that people, get all stuck on, the next step, if you will, is the higher standard of proof. This is very important because if, even in the Meier case, in terms of this brilliant, wonderful evidence, if you remain focused on the UFO phenomenon part, you won't get into the higher standard of proof. Now, there's a bit of an intermediary step, to be sure, so I'll just explain it, and that is the information overall presented by, oftentimes presented to and published by, but published by Billy Meier in the contact reports, the biographical, the historical, the all sorts of fantastic information that, warrants study. Now, in and of itself, not all the information would be immediately considered the higher standard of proof. So let me explain what I mean by that higher standard of proof. Higher standard of proof is the abundance of Billy Meier's specific, prophetically accurate, scientific, geopolitical, environmental to be sure, medical, and economic information. That means information that he verifiably published years, decades prior to the occurrence of events foretold, prior to discoveries that were foretold, predicted, prophesied, however you want to call it. And when I say verified, verifiable, that means in this case that there is the very simplest, most basic, fundamental, and important methodology for presenting proof of first publication. It's known as a copyright. Copyright obviously doesn't mean that whatever's copyrighted is necessarily true. It does mean that it was published by the date presented. And that usually you'll find, well, in any legitimately published books, you're generally going to find that copyright date right there. Now, the thing about Meier's information, we've culled about 250 or more at this point, specific examples of this higher standard of proof, this prophetically accurate information. And the first thing we did was to cull it from the 4 volumes of the contact, the messages from the Pleiades, and the preliminary and supplemental investigation reports, all published by Wendell Stevens. So for those who aren't familiar with what I'm speaking about, the contact reports, Billy's transcripts of his conversations with the alleged extraterrestrial Plejaren, are transcribed by him at some point after he has the contact and the conversation. And he brings them forward from a telepathic feed. These conversations are stored in a very highly sophisticated technological device of some form that not only records them, but then it transmits them back to Billy, not in the Swiss German in which they are actually recorded when Billy and the Plejaren are speaking Swiss German to each other, or High German if they go back and forth. No, it's transmitted to him by a device in symbol pictures, symbols. And these symbols convey concepts or words, phrases. He is simultaneously receiving them telepathically, translating them into Swiss German, and with his one hand, typing them out in German on the keyboard. And German is, well, if you don't know, German language, when a noun, when you are typing or writing a noun, first letter is capitalized, unlike in English for sure. Sometimes there are capitalized words, first letters, but in the case of German, it's always that first letter of the noun. So he's got a cap lock thing, and he's going back and forth while he's doing this, and the stuff's coming at him at whatever speed. And he has been known to and filmed doing this at about 100 words per minute or more with his one good hand. Okay, so that's the mechanism. That's how that works. And then he hands the transcripts over to somebody at FIGU, someone in his group, for them to sign off on it on a date. And it is gone over by one or more people for spelling errors, basically, because he can make mistakes. anybody can. And if you are doing that process, even if someone was sitting there and you're like a court reporter, they've got to be very precise, two hands. People are speaking, whatever speed they're speaking, and they have words. They have their keys are different, as some of you may know, than a typewriter. Billy is using a standard German keyboard, and away he goes, one hand. So these conversations don't always have prophecies or predictions in them. And sometimes prophecies and predictions from the Plejaren, the prophets of past, and or Meier, are published as documents unto themselves and with dates going back to the books, because the books are, were put out when they have these copyright dates, and we can legally determine the outside date of the publication of any document. It may actually have been first transcribed by Billy even earlier than the date in Wendell's books, of course. But we go by those dates for the most part, and they have to date proved to be enormously valuable to this process, because there's a lot of these either conversational bits of information where Billy asks something and they tell him, and it's just in the flow of the conversation, as well as in places where they have given him specific predictions, or he has recited some of the ones that he's made himself, and even going back to when he was a child of 10 and 12 years old. So this is overall a body of information that we can prove to a legal standard. And then, of course, that means that if it was published then and the scientific information is correct to a scientific standard, when it was published. And that is astounding, because in so many cases, it simply presents ironclad evidence of space travel. And even more importantly, or amazingly, time travel as well. Now, when I said space travel, and I'm lingering here a little bit before I get to step 3, when Meier has published specific information, as he has in the 1970s, that's in these books about black holes, specific information about Mars, Venus, Jupiter, the moons of Jupiter, all this stuff, when he's published that, and we can prove that it was published before official discovery, it means that we are looking at information brought forward somehow by a man at a time in history when neither he nor anybody else on the planet had the technological capability to bring forward specific error-free information about things so distant and far from us that it would only be when we had advanced telescopes and probes and perhaps, astronauts going somewhere that we could gain that information. And as some of you also know, this has totally perplexed scientists. A fellow up at the USGS could not deal with the fact that Billy Meier verifiably published a ton of information specific about Mars, the water, the content of the canals, what it was composed. I mean, just lots of stuff, where the ice was, goes on and on. Is he just making lucky guess? No. So that's, to me, step 2. When people are moving into the contact reports and reading that, and then they're going to the prophetically accurate information, and they have, let's say, emerged out of the main preoccupation of eye candy, of UFOs. Step 3, the creation energy teaching. You come to find out that there really is a reason. And this is always in ufology the unasked question, among others. If this is true, well, what's the reason for it? We do want to know the reasons for things. Now, this is in and of itself, if true, the most amazing development story material in all of science and human history. But why? Why us? How did this happen? And the answer I give is because this material, especially between steps 2 and 3, step 1, but 2 and 3, This is the key to our very threatened future survival. It means we come in this higher standard of proof. We start thinking about this. Wait a minute. It's not a one-off or two or five. There's dozens and hundreds of these, and they're not theories. They're not guesses, and they're not wrong so far. What's the reason? Well, start thinking, yeah, it's about us. If this is true, what else do they know? What else are they telling or trying to tell us? Well, you find a lot of the answers to that in the prophetic material because they're warning all the time about the things that are coming and what we should do. Now, in the creation energy teaching, that is the core of the whole thing, because that is a teaching of universal truth, of love, the teaching of the creation energy, part piece of every human being, formerly known as the human spirit, the teaching about how consciousness works. People have used the term mind, which Billy says is not accurate. How this works, what parts of the human being in the material and semi-material that we don't even know anything about. All of that and more. True morality, ethics, what is all of this? How do people learn to tune to the way to live, a title of one of Billy's books? Well, they do it also through learning the might of the thoughts and other things. That's also a title of Billy's book, and it's featured, pardon me, in the blog announcing tonight's show. If this is a show, a discussion, a monologue, it'll be many things. So we move then from, look at that, what is that in the sky, to thoughts lead to feelings, not the other way around. And then you get a little other thought in there that leads to your decision, your action. So you can decide if you're going to do this or do that or not do anything, or only do what it just keeps on going. That's, not even a teaser right there. So it's bringing us actually to this discussion about the war in your world, the war in our world, in my world, any of ours, in a world gone mad with aggression, violence, and destruction, right? You said that in the beginning of the thing. In a world gone mad. Well, how do we deal with the wars in our own personal and interpersonal world? This is another element, obviously, of the teaching, because the thinking, feeling, thinking, acting cascade, if you will, is a core part, as we said, of the teaching, the might of the thoughts, how they work. So we are learning to see things as they really are, a neutral, positive, equalized balancing, where the negative and the positive both have to be seen for what they are and brought into that balance, because you don't really only have positive when you're in a consciousness developing pursuit, life, and you don't only have negative, you have to, because we know every day in our life. So in the world at large, the macrocosm out there, we have enough evidence of the war in our collective world, which is, of course, a reflection of the war within us as part of humankind. This isn't a lecture to you. We know that. And we know also, certainly from the Meier material and from other sources, that in order for this world to become peaceful and wonderful and all of the individuals, we'd have to all be deciding progressively to come into embracing the teaching of the truth of this, of the life, of the creation energy. We'd have to align ourselves with those principles and have them greatly supersede egoism, egotism, self-aggrandizement, fame, fortune, acquisitiveness, amassing for the sake of amassing, and living, truly consciously and consciousness wise, evolved lives. So I used in my blog the term using emotional Tai Chi because, in the past 6-8 weeks, I went and took something I have, which is a consciousness workshop, and I inserted into it some of Meier's material that actually explains beautifully. I explain my process, but his explanations of these things are, of course, more eloquent, deeper, more comprehensive. When I had created the workshop and I'd sent it off on a DVD to him some years ago, asking him if I should keep it on a separate site somewhere and not intermingling it with my own work and promoting things on the blog, the teaching and the contact reports. He said, no, do this every opportunity, at the end of every lecture that you give or presentation out there in the world, which of course, since the pandemic was raging, I have not been out there doing that, but he said, do this at every opportunity. And with the addition of his additional explanatory information, I personally think, and I'm not the biggest promoter in the world, but I do say this is something of value. And I'll tell you what's happened for me about it recently. There's been an enormous amount of work that I'm just very happy has come my way in terms of this, things to do. At the same time, it's been tiring, and my habit is to go to sleep at a reasonable time, but I end up waking up within 4 hours of going to sleep. And so I try herbs, and then there's calm with calcium and magnesium. And sometimes these things work to a certain degree. And when they don't work, then it creates for me an anxiety that I'm not going to get enough rest. So like 2 nights ago, I had gone into a wonderful deep sleep, and I woke up, it was about midnight or 1, and I went, oh no. And I thought, wait a minute. Why don't I do my own process on myself so that I'm not in anxiety, at least, and help the energy to flow and to circulate so that the natural sleep cycle can begin to represent itself to me. So the last 2 nights, when that seemingly inevitable, I'm awake and it's dark out, happens, I go to my little process. I'm lying there in bed because even though I taught it standing, it evolved out of some standing Qigong work. It works in any posture. And I had a certain delight come over me because when I started doing it the first night, I was pretty, janged up in there. And by the time I was done, I kind of took note that, things are flowing again. I don't remember anything for the next 4 hours because then I fell asleep. So I thought I'm going to tell people about this within this context because anything that helps us to deal with the war in ourselves, the war can be, certainly conflicts with others. We here have had to deal with some issues with neighbors that took a lot of very delicate, patient, and firm, conduct, but loving and as neutral as positive to settle down some situations that arose around us. Everybody, in seeing others as being just the mini universes that we see ourselves to be is very helpful because we're less blameful. We can catch ourselves more quickly, move back to neutrality. It can be a challenge. So, point being, I'm going to tell you that if you go to the blog, if you want that, go look at the, testimonials and see if something like this, because this is a process that I realized after I've been teaching it. You don't have to do it just this way. Once you get the hang of what the principle of this is and how you're dealing with yourself inwardly, it's consistent with any meditative process. And maybe you'll find benefit from that. So let's move on to more confirmation of Meier's predictions that are unfolding. Now, I know that people are pretty aware that things are going a bit, shall we say, haywire in the world in many ways. There have been some recent headlines, and they don't stop. I mean, we've had headlines today that I didn't even have time for. There's all sorts of stuff, of course, happening always with Trump. It's all about him, and now he's getting to be all about him. I don't know that he's loving it, but he's going to make the most of it and that's not going to necessarily look real good for us. So there was an article about Capitol Police agents strained to probe increasing threats against lawmakers. And, well, why that struck a chord for me was that I recalled that there was some stuff that happened, and it was on January 6th. And I noticed after a while, that I was paying attention to it because Meier had said something. It popped into my mind in 2017, and I've gotten it written down here so I can actually read it off, since I don't know where else to find it. In the future, the USA and the US governors will be exposed to very frequent threats, 2017, which will come from both state and non-state acting persons who are hostile towards the government and state, as well as from great parts of the US population, whereby the US population will split into different population groups for which the basic factors have already been created, and consequently, the US population already in the current time, 2017, separates into different groups. Now, in in that same contact from 2017, because that's speaking about something there where the splitting up, he's already foretelling this in 1981, the coming US civil wars. And further in the 2017 information, the predictions and prophecies, he says, also in the USA, the population shall get dispossessed as a consequence of the worldwide financial crisis, which will lead to the incensed and partly heavily armed population being advanced on by military and police powers with evil Gewalt, violent force. So there was that headline that popped up, there it was. And then I noticed that there were other headlines that were, definitely pertaining to this tension, this buildup of things with Trump and what have you. And I'm going, well, this is the progression, and people don't want to apparently pay attention to this. Then there's another headline of a different nature, and that is that unexpected mutations from popular COVID antiviral drug corroborate. Meier, that's my version of the headline. The actual headline is warning, as popular COVID antiviral drug is driving unexpected mutations. Well, I don't want to be thrown off of YouTube again, so I'll simply tell you that you can search the blog and find ample evidence going back to the 1940s where Billy Meier is spelling this stuff out. He's giving the warnings. He's trying to help wake people up. And in so doing, a lot of positive and a lot of negative things have happened. The pressures on Billy Meier and the group, the FIGU group, have increased manyfold. It's very, very difficult things that are going over there that we can't go into in great detail. But the escalation of war and nuclear threat, which was also a bullet point, I'll tell you that has to do, pardon me, with the announcement about the testing that has increased in American, Chinese, and Russian, or the presence and activities at atomic nuclear testing facilities. So that's the war outside that we don't want to contribute to. We certainly don't want to receive it. And we want to be healing that within ourselves so that we're not at war with everything, including ourselves. There's a lab-grown meat center in Brazil now. There's a big story about that. And of course, that's also a conflict because a lot of people are very much against that type of development, foretold by Billy Meier as early as 1995 or earlier, but at least then. And of course, there are going to be, in any technological developments, imperfections, and you have to correct things and all. But the anti-lab-grown meat thing is extraordinary, and even I'm sure among some people that are vegetarians, they're concerned. But this is where, as Billy has said in the past, the fight against genetic manipulation and engineering will be irrational. It will hold back and retard development, which is not to say that all GMO things are by any means great, but there are those developments that are great or that are on their way to solving great problems that bother us and otherwise are not going to be solved by doing the same old, same old. Now, a quick note, because I have an interview I want to start soon. And that interview is going to be with Brigitte de Roch, and she's going to roll as well. Brigitte is quite interesting. And before that, I'll just talk about briefly. I got on our blog, Bruce Lella posted a link to a 2-minute and change video with a guy named Dr. Shiva, who's now running for president. And he has a lot of, there's other videos now, and I've seen one before. So I know this isn't just the only way he delivers, but many of you don't know anything about phonograph records, and because it's a whole other way back generational thing. They used to have 78, 45, and 33 RPM speed records. So, pardon me, in that sense, Dr. Shiva speaks at 78 RPM, and I want to hear it more at 33. Or we could say, when you're fast forwarding something and you get that Mickey Mouse kind of thing, it's pretty close. Now, just to say this, I have not studied Dr. Shiva's thing. From what he's presented, it sounds great. The only problems that immediately came up for me, he was putting out figures about how many people in the last election had voted for Trump, how many had voted for Biden. And these figures, X percent this one, X percent that one, which is, of course, how these elections are decided. And in looking at those figures, what I realized, because he was talking about people think it's all the deep state, but it's also the elite and this and that. I thought if there were so many people that chose to vote for either of these people, and here's Dr. Shiva making this impassioned plea for people to join his movement, he's got to recruit a lot of these people. Is he sure he really wants to do that? Because obviously people who might be self-thinking people, many of whom might like what he's doing and want to sign up, they're far in the minority. So this whole thing of thinking for ourselves and not buying into the actors that he called them, who we don't know that he's not an actor. He's acting a bit like an actor. And again, he might have a great, program here, but he even says from here on out, the true leadership is going to come from the ground up. And in that couple-minute things while he was explaining how many things are wrong in the world, I'm not sure that I know that what he is proposing to do is presented there, or if it's the real solutions. But another question, if you know that the real game is run and controlled by the elite, whether it's the deep state, the military industrial, as one person and with your movement, however, how do you think if you got into the presidency, you were going to succeed in pulling this off? So this is where, in terms of our world, we may choose to vote for somebody who's, he speaks about let's not vote for the lesser of two evils. Well, we, the people, have to be changing enough in our consciousness that step 3, the study of the creation energy teaching and all that's in there, to be evolving our consciousness. And a lot of things thereby start radiating from the swinging waves and the way we behave with each other. It's a slower process. It's not going to be the next guy or woman in office solves the problems. I think from what Billy has published over the decades, we can be pretty sure that good as that person may be, that isn't going to answer the agenda, the causal actions for centuries and even millennia are heavy, and they're bringing forward their results, their consequences. So I'm going to ask for our technological experts here, who's, guidance I need for certainly for getting Brigitte on to please activate the screen or the part piece of the screen. There is Brigitte de Roch. Hi, Brigitte. How are you?
Hi, Michael. So nice to see you. You have a baby face.
What's that?
You have a baby face.
I assure you, it's got to be the lighting. There's a lot.
No, you
No.
look pretty good. Yeah,
Hmm.
I find you very relaxed. I'm good, Michael. Thank you.
A baby face. Oh, well, thank you. So let's do this. Can we hear from you some background information like who are you and a little bit about your history and just that stuff. And then I've got a few specific questions that I'm going to want to ask you as well.
Very well. Yes, my name is Brigitte. My last name is de Roch. I'm originally from Belgium. I moved in 1982 to Texas with my family. The situation back then was the same as it is today with the situation with Ukraine. Back then was the Cold War and the Reagan area. So about 12 Belgian families decided to look elsewhere. There was real estate agents in Europe selling land in Texas. Then I went to the University of Texas, majored in languages, basically Spanish. Since I made it to Texas, I might as well pick up English and Spanish, and international relations. I graduated and looked around and I said, Texas could use some culture. Texas could use some foreign invasion of some sort. So I opened a language company. And I still have it. It's been 30 years now. And everything has grown, everything has changed. I saw in it a lot of how the United States is, a lot of the companies, and a lot of the foreigners. So I had both of them in my office. They were trying to do business together. So I didn't have to travel, but it was all right there. And then I always had an itch about, what's really going on. And then in 2016, I decided to put everything aside and do some searching. I went to see, I wanted to know what spirituality was about. So I went to see a spiritual healer here in Austin, and her name is Yvonne Self. So, a couple sessions, she told me, "Oh, Brigitte, you are from Sirius." Oh, I am? Yeah, I don't know if it's planet A or B, but you're from Sirius. You know the Plejaren. I had no knowledge of Sirius and Plejaren. And by the way, your ancestors are Dogon. I said, what? Yes. And so I just started doing the research. What is Sirius? What is Pleiadians? What is Dogon? Which you just had a post on it recently, which didn't comment on it, but Anna from Billy Meier.
Thank you. Well, that says a lot right there, doesn't it? Then you found Billy Meier. Well, what is your current perspective of the U.S.?
So, having somewhat grown up into the country and having left a place where I did not even know my own country because I was too young to get to know Belgium. I questioned the United States for many, many years, wondering where this energy came from, how they are the way they are, why they think the way they think and behave the way they behave. And today, my current observation of the United States, it feels like I'm in a big grocery store, and instead of buying, my little coffee, which I have two selections of, I have aisles of choices. And no matter where I look, everything is too much. Too much. Uh, churches, for example, there's all kinds of churches here. Blue, white, green, Lutheran, I can't even say the names. Too much choices on food, for example. You know, you can eat Korean, Chinese, Italian. I mean, it's nice for a while, but after a while, you just stay away. And this is how I have lived since the 90s. It's just to stay away because I simply cannot make decisions. It confuses me, and I just said no to a lot of things. But I was involved with the country, don't take me wrong, but I did not buy into the things that I guess the consumerism, you would say. And as a result, I was able to remain kind of like on the side road or on the side. And it's so easy to follow Billy because obviously what I see is the people are confused. There's so much drugs. I never imagined America would have the drug problem that it has. I mean, people on the street like zombies. I did a little campaign on that, and you would want to run to Billy with everything that you see, especially for the natives. You know, it must be very difficult for them. But as you say, you know, there's the system that they are having a hard time to detach from, maybe. And as a result, when you come with the Billy material, the brain just shuts down and it's in and out, or they just cannot even imagine, you know, it's true, or, you know, they are so used to having bombardments with fake stuff that the truth is non-existence. And that's how I see the United States.
Well, let me ask you then, how do you see that you have benefited yourself from the study of the Meier material? And let me say, in other words, here you are in this massive overstocked supermarket of a culture, so to speak, with so many people that are troubled and, you know, hurting and addicted and all this stuff. And that wasn't what you came from, but you came from a whole other culture. So with Billy's material, how does it benefit you in terms of your everyday life in this world?
So since I stay with the basics, you know, for example, I still use cassettes, you know, that's how basic I am. When I came to the Billy material, then I was able to really look within myself. I was able to acknowledge my weaknesses, recognize my weaknesses, work and see that I have things that needed attention, that are not good for me. And I did not really realize it when I got into the material because superficially everything was hunky-dory. I had to go in a deeper level. And the reason I was able to do that is because I did not give up on the material. I did not give up on your show. I did not give up on just learning. And eventually all the bad things in me came out. And that's when I got the material to give me meaning. So I received the step-by-steps approach or recommendation to become what is called now a true human being. You know, I really like the fact it's very mobile, that I can take the teachings with me anywhere I go, anytime during the day. Found that very handy because I like to be busy. And I got to be my own mental doctor for my own mental function. Plus, there's the physical aspect, you know, of the teaching too, the health benefits. I mean, everything on the. So in this way, it benefited me very greatly. But most important, Billy's words. really has ways of communicating
Sure
that
does.
I just meditate on his words. Sometimes I meditate on one word for the whole day. And I don't know, it has an effect on me. How he speaks. The books are almost written for me. And he takes me by the hand, and it's a beautiful journey.
Well, as you're speaking about this, we want to tell people that this thing, the UFOs, these fantastic objects. This is in what I was speaking about in the beginning of the show. This step one, this eye candy. But in these, and most, not all, but in these craft are true human beings, actual human beings, who assist Billy Meier and who also study the teaching that's published for them. I have a little story about that, maybe we'll get to, but we forget. You see, nobody is ever asking, as I said, what's the reason for these contacts? It isn't even, for all these great, great photos and films and everything. That's not why they're here. So what do you like most about the material? I know you just said a lot of things that might even be some of that which you like most, but do you have a most thing that you're most?
What I like the most is that I was able to remove my negativity. So many days I'm saying, I'm so glad I work for myself. I'm so glad I don't have this on me anymore. I'm so glad I have gotten rid of this. That's the most important, is that it's transformed me by giving me open room in my brain to now really evolve.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of was stuck for many years. And, being sarcastic is a form of negativity for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I was sarcastic. I never get upset or angry, but I become sarcastic, and I know that about me. So I always knew that about, anyway. So to me, having gotten rid of that um, has allowed me now to constantly progress and constantly evolve. And also the practice. I really like things that require practice. So right now, for example, I'm at the state where I'm making an inventory of my thoughts and feelings, just to log them in, because during the day I realize they pass by and
Mm-hmm.
I may not catch them. So that's okay. If I'm wanting to make a little faster progress, let me make an inventory, just
Mm-hmm.
an objective inventory, just to write them down. So that's what I'm doing this week, for example.
Wow. Well, you said something before I forget it, about it helps you to get to know yourself. And that is, there's many quotes throughout history, man, know thyself and all this stuff. But to know oneself is ultimately quite a rewarding thing, because it isn't always easy. It isn't always pleasant, obviously, but it's always opportunity, and opportunity to grow, to start feeling more about coming home to ourselves. Billy's got an affirmation in German, and the English version is, I think it's, I bring my consciousness home. I let go of everything. I relax myself. Ich bringe mein Bewusstsein nach Hause. Ich lasse alles los und ich entspanne mich. Something like this. And I remember when I saw that and it was shown to me, and I thought, well, that's a funny one. What does that mean? I bring my consciousness home. It didn't at first make sense, but this has a way, as do many of his words, like you say, you'll meditate on a word, his teaching parables, or not so much parables, but rather, let's say, the texts that he writes, a paragraph, a sentence or two, and it just brings you into that place of contemplation. And it oftentimes does it differently each time you read it, as I think you know. So I found that what you said is very true. And I think it's very true for many people who are consciously aware they're working with the material. They want to evolve their consciousness. Billy says the meaning of life is the evolution of consciousness. So I think the way you describe it, is there anything you'd like to add to what you've said about this? Please feel free.
Well, it's also the logical approach. There is nothing buts and if and excuses and all the things that we see outside. Everything is, as is so, that's the way it is. And I feel very comfortable with this approach because I can follow the teaching with trust and confidence in myself and know that I'm making progress. That it's not like something I'm going to sign up for and then next week or next month or next year, oh my goodness, I wasted all my time or I didn't get what I wanted out of it. So the one thing that is important for me is whenever I do fall back, that I'm not in line with myself, or I see the need to work, or something is off, or oh, today I felt great, I don't need to do this, so I go back, right? Whenever I fall, not falling apart, but I fall on the sidetrack, I feel it, and I pick up a book in Billy, and within 5 minutes, I'm back to myself. And I found that to be incredible. That I can go back to complete self within minutes.
Brigitte, you spoke about the logic, and I initially thought, because the teaching is so full of logic itself and guides one to think, to learn to think logically, even scientifically. And then in the last contact report, there was a lot of information from Billy about the value of feelings and emotions. Usually, as he said, usually emotions are these things that are mainly like negative, but there are positive emotions. And he spoke about the need to develop feeling. And then in books, he talks about fine senses, of fine feeling things. The dimension of the teaching is great. And I thank you for coming on board and sharing your experience, how this has come about in your life and what has come about in you from the study. So I'm sure we'll be speaking again soon. And thank you very much for sharing with our audience.
You're very welcome, Michael. This is my everything from the beginning until now that I took and did. So if it works for me, it works for everyone.
I know the feeling. If it works for me, it should work for everybody. Well, thank you again, Brigitte. We will talk again soon. And good night to you.
Yes, you're welcome, and Salome, Michael.
Salome.
Salome.
Peace on earth and to all beings and all that good stuff. Thank you. So in talking about this, I am reminded, I made myself a note because there was an email to me from a fellow, I think it's a fellow named Dekavian. Sounds like more of a male name. And he was asking about, the difference, the important difference between religion and the creation energy teaching as published, presented, brought forth by Billy Meier. So I wrote him an answer in the email or forum, wherever this thing was. And I thought, you know what? That's not a bad explanation. It's not the only explanation, but for something I had to do quickly, I thought it was fair enough. It had enough balance to it. And just so you know, what we do very often is on the blog, we have many different topics, clearly, and we encourage the conversation for people whenever they come and find the material, read and feel free to ask or to tell or to say or what have you. So I thought I would give you the response. I'm not going to call it an answer so much. I'll give you the response I wrote to him. And this, I haven't looked at it yet today. I copied it down so I could read it, but I'm hoping it's as doable as I remembered it. So I said to him, "Hi, Dekavian. I think you raise a very important point about the huge differences between the creation energy teaching and religions, belief versus knowing. The fact is that we must come to know the truthfulness of the teaching through study, application, and testing of the teaching in our everyday lives. This requires practice, patience, consistency, self-honesty, close attention to our thoughts, feelings, and actions, kind of like we were just speaking about a bit. In other words, complete self-responsibility for everything in our lives on a moment-by-moment basis. We don't fool ourselves or pretend that our lives have changed. We continually strive in this process, and in time we start to see the evidence to know that the application of the teaching is improving the quality of our lives, noticing the small or large things that are evidence of its truthfulness and of the immutable law of cause and effect, which is one of those foundational universal laws that are so frequently evidencing themselves in our everyday lives and are explained over and over in the teaching and even in other laws. Like I was thinking the other day about the law of provision, which essentially, now this is my version, I'm not reading, it's kind of like when you're living in a harmony whereby you are bringing forward to your best of your ability, to exemplify and live by the teaching, that it isn't that the universe comes down and bestows anything on you. When you live in harmony with these laws, that in and of itself brings forward cause effect, that which helps to support and nurture you, me, whoever's doing this stuff. So, we live a pretty freelance life with all this material and trying to, to create shows and blogs and press releases and books that are coming and all sorts of things. And that's done on spec. So that requires a certain amount of either insanity or trust, not belief, but trust in that the law of cause and effect, the law of provision, so that however, whenever, wherever, through whoever, and however, that which you need is brought forward and is present for you. And I've long come to decide that when you have what you need as you determine it, then you're wealthy. Well, what if you need, do you have it? Do you need it if you don't have it? And this, to me, is that which liberates us from the dependence on and the habitual craving and addiction to amassing the excessively unnecessary and the unnecessarily excessive, and thereby also recognizing that gratitude, that thing that comes where we are glad and full of gratitude for life, is ever present. So with that, I say, be safe and serene and Salome, and Salome. See you next week, hopefully so.